This is the Cycle, a game with two faces, each of them being a unique take on the genre they were based on. One being a battle royale where instead of being the last one standing to win, you would rather do PvEVP type missions to earn points to be the one on top of a leaderboard. Or how the other is an extraction shooter with a unique sci-fi setting and easy to understand gameplay loop that made it stand out. A game that had two identities and two lives. And by the time you're watching this video, no longer exists. Today we will discuss The Cycle, a game that literally lived and died twice. How it is the game came to be, what made each version so special, and what ultimately happened to it. The Cycle was developed by Jaeger. Based in Berlin, Germany, they are a AA studio that has worked on games like Jaeger, a space combat game in 2003, and Dreadnought, a space fleet management game in 2017. But they are most known for the 2012 cult classic, Spec Ops: The Line, a game that masquerades like a generic third-person cover shooter, but with a narrative similar to the film Apocalypse Now. There is a reason so many videos have been made on it, and I implore you to check them out so you can check out one of Jaeger's greatest works. From the looks of it, development for The Cycle started around 2017, going under the internal name of Project Prospect, and had its first official alpha in August 2018. Their idea was essentially what they called a competitive quester, where players compete by completing quests in a sci-fi environment that varied in risk and reward. The game would continue development and have more playtests through 2018 into 2019, and after that had its first official season on October 22, 2019, which we'll consider the official launch and of course the birth of The Cycle. So now that we have discussed some of the game's history, it's time to discuss what the game actually was. The Cycle is a player versus environment versus player first-person competitive quest shooter royale. What does that mean? It meant that you and 19 other players would drop into a map where you each competed to complete the most PvE related contracts with a limited time frame of 20 minutes. Contracts that range from farming natural gas, defending a drone carrier from alien mobs, powering up the local facility, and everyone's favorite, PvP. Contracts that once completed rewarded XP, money, and points. Points were used to score you and the other players, placing you in a leaderboard that changed in real time. And the money you earned you could use to buy yourself better gear, whether that be weapons, abilities, or a bike. And the XP helped players level up to get passive bonuses over time. But as time progressed, the skies began to get darker, and the radioactive storm that is the Cycle began to manifest. If you evacuated with the most points before the storm's radioactivity started to affect you, congratulations, you've won. Players were rewarded based on placement and the points they gathered from the contracts they did. So the person in first place got more rewards, but even if you didn't evacuate with the most points in the match, that was okay, as just evacuating with some points was enough. Obviously they wouldn't get as much rewards, but it was still something. Which, unlike other battle royales or competitive shooters, there wasn't necessarily one winner or loser. You didn't solely win by getting a first place or getting the most kills, but rather by how much you did in a match, or simply just evacuating in time. That is basically The Cycle in a nutshell. There is more to the game, and I'm obviously oversimplifying. But that was the basic premise. But to go more into detail, that would mean for me to overanalyze and talk about almost everything The Cycle had to offer. And who knows how long that will take. Starting the game presented you with a short animated cutscene that perfectly summarized what made the game unique.
Decades ago, we settled on Fortuna 3. And for a while, this frontier world was paradise. We mined its vast resources in the shadow of ancient ruins. Then one day, the planet turned against us, with freak storms forcing us to evacuate the colony. Now, only the toughest adventurers dare to set foot on the surface. With the colonies lost, we set up base on Prospect Station, orbiting the deadly planet. It's where we trade, arm ourselves, and gear up for the next drop. It's home. My name's Badam. I run things up here. So, You want to be a prospector. I've seen all types try their luck. Some ended up friends for life. Others, well, they're the more ruthless type, proud of the bounties on their heads. When you drop down to Fortuna 3, you've got to ask yourself, what kind of prospector am I? A glory hunter, willing to do whatever it takes for victory. A team player who won't leave anybody behind. Maybe you're here for the bragging rights. Like hunting down a galaxy's deadliest beasts and living to tell the tale. Or you could be the cold-blooded sort, preying upon rival prospectors instead. In the end, anything goes in the hunt for fame and fortune. Welcome to the Cycle. I think you'll fit in here just fine.
After finishing the intro, you would have been placed into Prospect Station. This was the player hub area where you would spend most of your time between matches. You could interact with other players, explore the station, check up on some progress, buy cosmetics, and most importantly, unlock gear to improve your loadout, to properly stand a better chance in the surface of Fortuna 3. Your loadout was an important tool for any prospector, so let's take some time to truly discuss it. The Cycle allowed you to have a loadout. This loadout would be selected and equipped before a match started. Every loadout consisted of a base suit, a primary weapon, and up to 4 additional weapons or gadgets, 4 abilities, and of course, your ride. During a match, your loadout will work as a gear store, and once you earned enough money, you can choose what you wish to buy from the store. Weapons, gadgets, and abilities were categorized by price, so during a game, you constantly had to consider how much money you had and how much you needed to get the gear that you wanted. Every player could only use 1 base suit at a time, dropped with whatever primary weapon they had in their loadout, and could store up to 3 weapons or gadgets and 2 abilities during a match. So let's take a look at the gear you could have used. Every player started with Kotech weaponry already in their loadout, and they were the K28, a semi-automatic pistol working as a primary weapon, the S567 PDW SMG that resembles the real-life AS Vector, the B9 trench gun, the C32 bolt-action sniper rifle, the AR-55, and lastly we have the FF9 grenade launcher. You were also given 2 free abilities, the heavy turret, which suppressed an area as long as it had enough health, and a cloaking device which, once activated, made you temporarily invisible. Every player also came equipped with a scanner. This would beep in frequency the closer you got to a specific target, which could have been contracts, mobs, money, and players. And lastly, of course, a bike, which provided fast transportation across the map, but could be stolen or destroyed by other players. Every player also had access to Prospector kits. Kits gave you a recharging shield, a unique movement, and attack abilities based on the one you used. By default, players were given the basic Prospector kit, which gave you a small jetpack that could be used to clear some terrain, but had no attack ability. This was the gear all players should have received at the start, and if you wanted to unlock other weapons or abilities, it would be up to you to earn them by working with factions and gaining their favor. The Cycle had 3 factions: ICA, Osiris, and Korolev, each with their own ideologies, weapons, and abilities. When a match started, you were prompted to choose from one of the 3 factions. Whoever you chose would be your sponsor for the match. As you did contracts and met quotas, they would have chimed in with unique dialogue to the faction and leader. But this will also earn you XP for them, which helped you gain reputation, unlocking more and more of their arsenal as you gain more and more of their favor. So let's take a look at each of the factions and some of their gear. The ICA was a faction that is by the people, for the people. They pride themselves in making everything in station, using the signature Azure wood on almost all of their weapons, giving you access to the Dragonfly kit, which was similar to the basic Prospector kit, but with a stronger jetpack that had an added dive attack ability. Their weapons were the Bulldog shotgun pistol as a primary weapon, the semi-automatic Lacerator DMR, a Space M1 Garand, the Advocate AR, the Voltic Brute SMG, the Shattergun Shotgun, the Kinetic Arbiter Sniper Rifle, the ICA Guarantee LMG, and lastly, the Haze, which was a sci-fi rocket launcher type weapon, which shot these concentrated balls of energy that stayed in place and did damage over time. And if that wasn't enough, you could combo them together, creating this giant bubble of purple energy that fried anything inside it. And you can even overload the bubble to make it explode, doing massive damage to anything in its radius. Besides these weapons, ICA also had a gadget called the Recall Teleporter, which worked by placing down a marker anywhere and then activating it to teleport to wherever you placed that marker. However, it took a while to teleport, and the marker could always be destroyed. Apart from these weapons and gadgets, ICA had abilities that consisted of the Snare Trap, which hoarded enemies into a specific area, an Orbital Strike, an Impenetrable Dome Shield, a Simple Grenade, and an aura that healed anyone nearby. Osiris was the scientific faction, and as such, their gear was more or less experimental, making their gear look like it had just come out of testing, giving you the experimental Oni Quicksuit kit, giving players a double jump and directional dodges at the cost of some shields. They gave you the Scarab, a 3-burst machine pistol as a primary weapon, the Gorgon, a laser pointer assault rifle, the ASP Flechet SMG, an experimental SMG that shot Flechet rounds instead of the usual bullets, the Basilisk DMR, the Phasic Lancer, the Manticore Assault Rifle, which was an assault rifle version of the ASP and my personal favorite weapon. And finally, they had the Zeus. Osiris also had the Kepler Revitalizer gadget, which worked as a healing gun that healed any nearby abilities and allies, and could even be used on yourself. Their abilities consisted of a precise but high damage dealing orbital strike, a directional warp, which is a blink teleport, a type of cloaking device that works better if you aren't moving, a healing device that stays stationary but heals anyone in its radius, and an impenetrable protective shell, which surrounds your Prospector and protects you from all damage for a brief period of time. Korolev was the obligatory Russian megacorp faction who had a strange attraction to mass-produce industrial orange, giving you access to the Boxer kit, which gave you more shields and health, as well as a charged jump and a charged punch ability. Their arsenal consisted of the Hammer revolver as a primary, a fitting name for a Russian revolver. Their other weapons were the Core 47 assault rifle, which sounded more powerful than it really was, the Scrapper SMG, which has the strangest design of all the weapons and looks more like a mining tool than an actual SMG, the Comrade Grenade rocket launcher, to signify that they are the Russian faction, the KBR Longshot DMR, the Maelstrom Shotgun, and finally, they had the Karma Sniper Rifle, which was technically a railgun, and the Karla, which was a portable handheld artillery cannon. Their abilities are a small kinetic barrier that blocks incoming damage but you can shoot out of, an orbital strike, warp bomb, which is a directional warp that causes an explosion upon exiting the warp, and an aura that does damage to anything that's not you or your teammates, the Skirmish Sphere. This was some of the gear available to you in the cycle. However, this isn't the end of it. I mentioned it before, but suits, weapons, and abilities can be upgraded during a match. Kits were upgraded passively. As you completed contracts or killed creatures, you gained XP, which helped level up your suit. This gave you benefits unique to the kit you had equipped, but could range from more damage to creatures, more shields, or smaller cooldowns for your kit's abilities. Weapon gadgets and abilities themselves could also be upgraded by the gear store for a cost of 150 credits per upgrade, and usually help with reducing the cooldown or reload speeds depending on what you were upgrading. Loadouts could also be modded outside of a match, and this part of the game could single-handedly alter your loadout completely. The Cycle allowed you to mod your loadout with up to 4 mod slots depending on the item. Some of these mod slots included better handling, faster reloads, bigger magazine sizes, or simply changing the optic on your weapon. But some mods were different, giving you various playstyle opportunities and even changing how a weapon or Prospector kit function entirely. You know the K28 as a semi-automatic pistol. With this mod, it's now full auto. The bolt action sniper rifle is cool, but what if you traded off some of its damage for piercing rounds? Kits could also be modded in a similar style, whether you wanted a more potent punch, a triple jump, or a mod that allowed you to have more health and shields but at the cost of most of your movement speed, all of which was up to the player to decide. You could always change them, offering many opportunities for experimentation and letting the player choose and build their loadout to their playstyle. Your loadout was one of the most crucial things in the Cycle, and modding it to your liking was even better. Now that we have talked about kits, weapons, abilities, and of course modding, it's finally time to see how all of this worked during combat. With all of the kits, weapons, and abilities, you could practically play however you wanted and still get away with it. But no matter what, you would always have shields and health. Your shields were this blue bar and served as a second health bar. The shields protected you from all sorts of damage, but they could be broken. And if that happened, you would have started taking damage to your health. Both, however, regenerated after a short while, with a little status bar telling you how long it takes until a recharge happens. But if you manage to lose both your health and shields, you would enter a down but not out phase. You will be vulnerable and won't be available to engage in combat or interact with anything, but you can still move around, which you can use to move to a safer location. After a while, however, if you weren't revived or finished off, you would be brought back into the action with your shields recharged and with half of your health. But if, however, you were finished off, it wasn't game over just yet, as you would find yourself back at your spawn missing an emergency recall battery. This recall battery worked as a way to have, in theory, infinite lives, as long as you went back to the spot where you previously died and got the battery back. But it's officially game over if you die without your recall battery. This system allowed players multiple opportunities on death, and as long as they played it well, they could get back into the action as many times as possible. There was also a pack mechanic. This was a way to form a bond during games. Only available in solos, this mechanic allowed players to team up if they wanted to. All they had to do was look at a player and send them a pact invite with the press of a button. And if the other player agreed, both players would create a pact. They could work together and see where the other is on map at all times, at the cost of both of the players losing their shields. Players could also break pacts if they wanted to, which would effectively give them a chance to stab the other in the back. Map-wise, there was only 2 maps you could have dropped into, Bright Sands and Crescent Falls. Both maps acted similarly, with certain high-value contracts, POIs, and the evac point being placed close to the center of the map, to encourage PvP and to add to the overall risk and reward gameplay loop. Bright Sands was the default map, with bright red sands at the south giving the map its name, giant waterfalls at the north, a swamp with the skeletal remains of a giant creature, an abandoned science campus construction project, overgrown relays, a dig site seemingly frozen in time, and at the center was a giant building with multiple entrances where anybody could be hiding. If you looked at the sky, you could see a broken planet and even Prospect Station. The map was mostly flat, but it made up for it with the abandoned rusty buildings and the colorful vistas, all presented within the game's beautiful art style. Crescent Falls was the bigger map in size and was overall an improvement to Bright Sands. Not only was it a larger map, but it also had much more verticality. There was a giant broken alien ring structure at the center, surrounding a ruined city with a bar and garage, with rivers leading up to salt flats with geysers, abandoned pumpkin farms, a huge jungle where the trees go higher than you can see, and a desert with rocks with jade interiors and a nice oasis located in its center. Both of these maps had their strengths and weaknesses, and learning them was part of the challenge of being a prospector. But what exactly were you facing on the planet? Besides the challenge that other players provided, there were mobs you had to take care of. First were the dirt beasts, which appeared in specific contracts or in certain places on the map. As the name suggests, they came from the ground. The dirt beasts were the Grubbling, a basic melee enemy. These were the marine beasts who, although weak, attacked by rushing the player with some quick melee attacks. The Spitter. These beige and blue mobs were basically the ranged enemy, shooting 3 burst energy projectiles towards you with sometimes in arches in case you were behind cover. But they could also use melee attacks if they got close enough to the player. The Ravager was a lime green mob, combining the dangers of the Spitter and Grubbling, attacking by lunging at the player with green projectiles in a shotgun-like pattern. The Stinger. This purple dirt beast used a heavy-hitting ranged attack which had to be charged and obliterated shields at the cost of having low health. The Brute, which, as the name suggests, was more of a tank-like creature, with a lot of health and using melee attacks to inflict heavy damage, either by its swipes or by lunging at the player. The Warden, a ranged version of the Brute, had high health but attacked similarly to a Spitter. The projectiles, however, always launched in an arc. If those didn't hit a player, they would stay on the ground acting like mines, detonating if a player got too close. And of course, last but not least, the Howler. This was a flying healer who buffed, healed, and spawned enemy mobs, but also attacked either by a tail swipe if close enough, or by shooting a stream of needles at the player. There was also Ticks, which had 3 variants: Blast, Toxic, and Brood. Ticks attacked by running up to the player and exploding in their face. Depending on a tick, it would either deal some heavy damage, create a toxic area, or spawn more ticks. Another PvE enemy was the Cobots. These were humanoid robots that spawned in certain areas, or appeared in specific contracts. There were 3 Cobot variants, but all attacked by using their weapon or by kicking the player if they got close enough. The basic one was light gray and used a hammer revolver to attack. The other 2 were the Rocketeer, which was red and used the Comrade, and the Grenadier, being yellow and using the FF4 detonator. Both had slightly more health than the basic Cobot. Now that we have talked about some basic mechanics and gear, let's actually play the game. You could get into a match through a menu or through the launch terminal, but like most multiplayer games, you have to wait to get into a match via queue. You could only choose between solo, duos, and squads, so in theory there was enough options to find a game and play alone or with others. However, this wasn't the case. Back then, the player base was ridiculously low. Whether this was due to the game's low popularity or because it was an Epic Games Store exclusive is another story. Still, according to Jaeger, the highest number of players the game ever got in this state was around 1,000 at the start of Season 3, and dropped steadily after, mostly ranging around the mid-100s most of the time. This caused queue times to be, well, extremely long. So much so that many would stop the queue and restart it just to make it look like it's loading faster, knowing full well there wasn't even a difference. And when you did get into a match, it was with a group of people with entirely different skill levels, so matchmaking wasn't the greatest, but at least you got into a game. Once you did get into a game, you would have been prompted to choose from one of the 3 factions that would have been your sponsor for the match. This will determine which of the factions you will gain XP for, as well as who you will have talking to you on the surface. At the same time, you would have been placed in this little pre-match lobby area. There's a giant billboard here where you can see who you're up against, 2 giant holograms of random players, a hologram of the map you'll be dropping into at the center, an empty bar, screens that show the contracts that are going to be present in the match, as well as some basic description of each, and a screen showing off in-game tips. There were some windows which showed Fortuna 3 with the Cycle Storm ranging below and how you will be dropped literally at the eye of the storm. If you look straight up, you can even see the window where the station terminal is. And if you were in the station, you could have seen this area as well. If that wasn't enough, you could also hear Badams, the game's intro narrator, talking through a megaphone during this time. Eventually, however, the last 10 seconds arrive, and the drop pod's hatches open. Batten gives final warnings as alarms blare. You didn't have to go to your drop pods during this, as you were admittedly just teleported to the map once the timer ended, but this area, its visuals, its ambience, as well as Batten's warnings and tips, while seeing everyone do their own thing while we all waited to drop. It was something that made me love the game and, in my opinion, was one of its greatest strengths. Eventually, however, the timer ended and everything cut to black, where a loading screen regarding the map will load, and once it finished, you and everybody else were dropped into Fortuna 3. Once you landed on a planet, the game truly began. You and 19 other players will have 20 minutes to complete as many contracts as possible. Each contract gave you BP or victory points, some cash, and XP. As you completed contracts, they would have increased in demand, and so would their reward. As you got money, you can buy better weapons and abilities from the gear store with just the press of a button. And once you buy whatever it is you needed, it will be dropped in front of you, ready to use. The gear store will show off only the things currently in your loadout, which is one of the reasons the loadout was so important. Buying more vital gear can make completing contracts much more manageable, as everyone started with the primary pistol in their loadout. So to get better gear, you and everyone else in the match are forced to make money by either killing mobs, finding it out on the maps, or completing contracts. It's an exciting way of getting gear, as you don't have to look around the map for gear like in most Battle Royale games, but instead work for it. The game also doesn't force you to buy anything. It's up to you to decide what to or what not to buy from the gear store. You can save up for a more powerful but more expensive weapon, or buy something immediately when you had enough money for it. You could also organize your loadout, drop stuff you didn't need, even drop cash if you want. And as you did things during a match, your suit would have leveled up. Depending on the kit, this could have ranged from unlocking new suit abilities, reducing cooldowns, or increasing specific resistances. Around the halftime, a huge explosion would happen at the center of the map, and you would have noticed the skies becoming darker as the Cycle Storm Eye began to shrink. And eventually, a ship began to circle the evac area at the center of the map. And the best music in the game started to play. This song was a warning. No, it was a message, and it was simple. Evacuate or die. The moment this song played was a reminder to all the players to either get some last points in or to start heading to the evac area. Because if you didn't leave with that ship, it meant death. So it was a race to get a ticket back to the station to finalize your place on the leaderboard, knowing full well you would encounter other players doing the same. It was always an adrenaline rush whenever the endgame of a match started, because you never knew if you would evacuate or if all the hard work you did would have been for nothing. And that was the game. Drop into a planet, do PvE related quests to earn points and money, use the money to buy yourself better gear to do more contracts while watching out for PvP at the same time, and evacuating at the end of the match. If you evacuated with the most amount of points, you win, with a lot more XP, money than everybody else in the match, which you can then use to buy abilities, weapons, and mods in the station. However, anyone could have evacuated. You simply would have been rewarded based on the placement. So unless you died in the game, no one truly lost. But, no matter what, you would always be doing one thing on the surface. Contracts. Contracts were what the factions had you do on the surface of Fortuna 3. These contracts ranged in playstyle and difficulty. Some were more PvE focused, while others relied more on the PvP engagement to keep them entertaining. But no matter what contract you ever did, you were always rewarded upon completion with XP, cash, and victory points. And as you finished contracts, their demand would have slowly increased with the rewards as well. If you wanted to win a game or get a lot of victory points, you'd have to take various contracts forcing you to travel the map and play differently, depending on the situation. These were the contracts that the factions had you do. This one was fairly simple. You were rewarded if you managed to either make a player use an emergency recall battery or completely kill them. The reward for bounties was 5 victory points, which may not seem like much, but remember that the game encourages players to take other contracts as the reward was much more significant. The game had PvP, but it didn't solely rely on it, as it wanted the tension of it, but didn't want it to be too rewarding, as is PvP in other Battle Royale games. This was the most common contract of all, and the contract that was guaranteed to be in every match. Minerals came in veins rated in difficulty and yield. You started the contract by interacting with minerals, which called a drill that started to mine them over time. However, the drilling noise attracted dirt beasts that would attack the drill. The number of creatures depended on the mineral weight. However, it was always up to the player to defend the drill from these creatures that would have tried and destroyed it. If that happened, you would have had to restart drilling all over again. After the drill was finished, the chime would be played, and a beacon would be displayed telling anyone in the area that the mineral drilling is done and ready to be collected. A nice feature, as many players would have been preoccupied fighting the mobs. You would have been rewarded based on how much minerals you mined to meet a certain quota. But you could have also stolen minerals from unsuspecting prospectors as they were busy fighting the mobs, which could also meant that this could have happened to you. The hunt's contract premise was to hunt mutated versions of mobs and collect their biomass once killed. You were awarded victory points depending on how much biomass you collected. You found this biomass by going to a designated hunt area on your map, which showed you its difficulty based on how many stars were shown. Usually the higher difficulty, the more creatures you would have killed, and with that the amount of biomass you would have gotten was also greater. There was also a bigger, more challenging, and more rewarding version of the hunt contract called the Alpha Warden. This contract only appeared once a certain amount of biosamples had been collected throughout the entire match. The amount of biomass needed for this required many players to collect it, but once it was done, a warning was broadcasted to all prospectors, and a new contract appeared, the Alpha Warden. It's a simple hunt contract with a twist. There is only one target, effectively making it a boss fight. You are awarded victory points depending on how much you damaged the Alpha Warden, and even more so if you managed to take it down. The Alpha Warden worked as a boss by having a lot of health, doing a lot of damage, and spawning all biological creatures. So you had to fight it and be mindful of its attacks, but also of all the other mobs it could have spawned. Some added difficulty was also due to how valuable this contract was. You had to constantly watch your back for enemy prospectors who also wanted to take the Alpha Warden as a trophy. This contract worked by going to any of the abandoned power facilities that were scattered around the map. Each facility had to be powered up by activating 3 overgrown terminals that were hidden nearby. However, there was a catch. By activating each terminal, cobots would spawn, which would try to stop you from completing the contract by attacking you, a remnant of their old security protocols before the cycle. Once you found and activated all 3 terminals, you would have then had to power the main facility generator, and once that's done, contract completed. The power facility contract also had a priority version, which would happen if several facilities were powered throughout the match. This would spawn the central station, which would generate at the center of each map. This facility was different from the normal ones. You still had to find and activate each terminal, however, after you activated the main generator, a designated area will appear which made you stay in it to gain points, but during this process, waves of cobots of various difficulties would have spawned and attacked the player. After about 2 minutes into a match, there will be drones you can salvage scattered among the map. You had to go to a designated area and look for drones and interact with them to make them fly towards their carrier. You were rewarded depending on the condition the drones were salvaged. However, mobs would spawn near the drones and try to destroy them. So the player had to prevent that. And if by one chance one of the drones was destroyed by a mob, the contract would stay on hold and you couldn't complete it for some time. So if you wanted to do this contract efficiently, you had to kill the mobs first and then salvage them, as the better condition of the drones, the more points you got. Then comes the drone launch or drone defense segment of the contract. If you salvaged all the drones, a message would play signifying the drone carrier is ready for launch. If you went to the drone carrier, you were prompted to, if you wanted, to launch it. and doing so started the drone defense contract, where you had to defend the drones as they were exposed during the state from any hostile creature before its launch into space. The thing about the drone defense and launch contract is that any nearby prospectors are given another contract while you defend your drones. Their goal would be to sabotage and destroy the drones before their launch, meaning that there was always a chance someone could try and sabotage you. This contract relied on two trains, both on opposite sides of the map's rail system, that led to the center of the map. During the beginning of the game, the trains would stay in their spawns, loading their cargo. After a while, both trains at the same time were ready to be launched, and Korolev's head letting every player know that the trains were ready to be claimed. Claiming a train will make it begin to move slowly towards the center of the map. You didn't have to be on the train at all once you claimed it, as it was self-piloted. You got victory points for how long you held the train during its passage to the center of the map, but anyone at any time could have stolen the train from you, as all you need to do is interact with the console at the front of the train to claim it. The train will keep going, but now the points go to its new owner. And once they reach the center, trains will begin to unload, and here, if you held the train during this phase, you got 3 times the amount of victory points than usually holding it. So trains became a sort of priority contract during the unloading phase. This was one of the more PvP-centered contracts you could have taken on Fortuna. You could have always checked the map to see where the trains were and the train's current owner. You could steal a train by either going up to the front of the train, as mentioned prior, which would have kept it mobile but changed its ownership to you, or you could have gone to the very back of the train and pressed the button, which would have made it stop entirely in its tracks, and whoever it currently holds would lose ownership of the train. Around the map, there were 3 uplink relays, with only one being active at a time, and throughout the match, they would have swapped. Using your map, you could have always checked which one was active and which one would have been next, even telling you how much time you had until the relay switched. If you went to a given relay and stayed in the highlighted area for a particular time, you would have been given ownership of the uplink, which would have passively given you victory points for as long as you held it. After you claim it, you didn't have to stick around and were free to do anything you wish, similar to the Mag Train contract. Also similar to the contract was how anyone could take the uplink from you, as all it took was to simply stand in it for a short time. You were also warned if someone is trying to steal the uplink from you, or if the uplink was switching relays soon. This was another of the PvP-centered contracts you could have taken on Fortuna 3. This was a straightforward contract. You simply had to go to a gas vein, which can be anywhere around the map, and interact with it, which will call down a refiner. The refiner will passively collect the gas for you, giving you victory points over time depending on how much you refine. As the match progressed, your refiners would have gotten better and collected gas more efficient, but they could also be stolen or destroyed by other prospectors. If your refiner is being stolen, you would get a message from your sponsor, and if you bring up your map, you can even see which refiner was being stolen. Apart from that, there wasn't much to do with this contract. In the match, 2 Zeal crystals would have spawned. Interacting with one made you carry it, and as long as you held it, you would have passively gotten victory points. You could have always dropped it whenever you wanted, or if you took too much damage. It was an excellent way to get some victory points passively, as you did other contracts, as you would have it with you at all times, but with the side effect of making you visible on every other player's map. There was also a more valuable Zeal crystal that would have spawned very close to the end of a match, called the Red Zeal. This acted like your ordinary Zeal crystal, just obviously red. But if you managed to evacuate with it, you would have gotten an extra 40 victory points to your score. The Bright Caps contract was a mostly PvE-focused contract. Around the map, there would be areas where these bright caps would spawn, but beware, ticks spawn here as well. Obviously, you would have to deal with them for the contract. You've gained points by collecting and then depositing these mushrooms in a specific area. Collecting them also made a visual change to you, as a canister would have been on your back where your bright caps would have been stored. Once you were going to deposit them, you had to stay in the designated area as your bright caps were being deposited. Ticks would spawn during this process, so you had to deal with them. Now, you could have gone around the map to each bright cap hotspot and collected them all, then that way, deposit them. Or you could have hunted other players with bright caps and either eliminate them or deal enough damage to them that they drop the canister on their back, collected said canister, and then deposit that to get victory points. The laser drill was a contract exclusive to team-based matches like duos or squads. A Korolev laser drill would have descended from the skies to one of the many drill hotspots in the area. Once it landed, anyone could have claimed it. Once claimed, it began to drill. However, this process spawned waves of creatures for as long as the drill was active. Creatures would try to attack a drill, and if the drill took enough damage, would cause it to explode, which was powerful enough to one-shot anyone nearby. And throughout the match, the drill moved from hotspot to hotspot, hovering over the entire map, which gave you some good views of the maps from a mostly impossible point of view. Players could also try to steal the drill at any time, making it one of the few PvEVP contracts. The Cycle Spike contract had a chance to appear near the end of a match when the storm was starting to intensify. This contract made you go to a designated area where the storm was more potent than the rest of the map. Here, lightning would fall frequently and sometimes where you stood. In this dangerous area, storm crystals would appear, and collecting them in groups of 4 gave you victory points. This contract was a very high risk, high reward, as the lightning does significant damage, and if you get struck, your location was temporarily revealed to everyone on the map. This contract was popular as it served as a way to make some extra victory points at the end of a match, and as long as you stayed mobile to avoid the lightning strikes, it was a reasonably easy contract. In the last minutes of the match, the evac ship would start to circle the center of the map where the evacuation point is, but cannot land due to the hostile creatures that spawn there. So it was up to the player to clear it from any of these creatures. And you would need to clear the area, as if you didn't, the ship would not land and could cause the entire match to get stuck on Fortuna 3. You got points for the amount of creatures you killed, so the amount of victory points rewarded to you for this contract was good enough for some last minute points. But the chances of running into other players was also high. This contract was self-explanatory, and yes, you did get points simply by evacuating the planet safely. This contract was even more valuable than team-based modes like duos or squads, as you would get points per team member evacuated. All you had to do was just touch the ship's doors and you would get a ticket back to the station, safe and sound. Personal contracts were hidden contracts that had a chance of spawning in a match. They all rewarded the same amount of victory points, but weren't central contracts, so to speak, as they were unmarked and you had to find them around the map. There were only 3 variants of them, but if you spotted one, it was a guaranteed free 40 victory points. If during prospecting you hear a distinct ringing, that pointed that there was a green egg nearby. You had to find it, collect it, and then deposit it in a location marked on your map where a crate laid. Once deposited, you were rewarded victory points. Around the map, you would sometimes see purple tracks. Interacting with them and following them would have led you to a nest. Interacting and looting said nest granted you some victory points. In some old abandoned buildings, some pink terminals would have spawned. Interacting them would have downloaded some old data, and collecting the data of 3 terminals would have rewarded you with some victory points. There was also story missions that you can get from Badam and the Lucky Leafman bar. These were map specific and required you to do a specific contract in a certain way, or going to a designated area and interacting with something ordinarily useless. Although they did not reward victory points, they did give you some lore and world building as well as some souvenirs, like skins for Korolev weapons or exclusive story items. All of these campaign missions also rewarded XP for the Battle Pass. One of the campaigns was called the Lost Prospector, and as the name suggested, had you following the tracks of a lost prospector. The prospector in name being a friend of Badam's named Hector. The campaign had you following in Hector's footsteps, at the request of Badam, usually doing regular contracts with a twist to them. Some of the more memorable parts of the campaign were when you had to look for some drop pods to find his data pad, or the part where you had to follow a clue he left behind in old graffiti called the Prospector code, making you travel around Bright Sands looking for landmarks to piece the code together. All of this led to Badam giving you a modified recall teleporter and having you power up a central station for a certain amount of time in order for you to use the teleporter to quickly get to a normally secret area, revealing a hyperloop to the second map called Crescent Falls, and some evidence that the Cycle Storm may or may not be artificially made. This teased Crescent Falls before it was even revealed and was a cool and unique way to tell a story in this type of game, all while leaving room for a continuation of the story. So when Season 2 for this version of the game was released with Crescent Falls, it also released with a second campaign titled Runaway. Runaway was split into two narratives that eventually converged. One had you working for the head of Korolev as you did some jobs for them. This included covering the tracks for them on the surface, either by chasing a troublemaker on a bike, as well as decommissioning some faulty drones that may or may not have some sensitive data they may want to raise. The other part of the campaign had you doing stuff for Badam. One of the highlights from his side of the story is that the prospector you were chasing for Korolev is the literal troublemaker Prospector, who is revealed to be named Helena and the daughter of Hector. You go on another graffiti scavenger hunt to finally find Hector's whereabouts, do some uplinks for a while, which apparently contained a lot of data containing many notes, photos, and video logs, but also about hidden Korolev facilities. You also get to bring up your old modified recall teleporter again and teleport to one of these facilities under Crescent Falls, seemingly being powered by an experimental mineral power source. Some experimental Korolev weapons, including a new set of drones, a new turret, and another hyperloop. You would have had to use your teleporter to get out, and once back on the station, Badam confirmed our suspicions and gave us the energy turret as a reward. This was essentially a regular turret that lobbed energy projectiles, but only towards enemy mobs.
Sorry, nothing to shoot.
And so this concludes the campaigns for the cycle. They were alright and served the purpose of bringing some narrative to the game. However, most of the exposition and context was in text, either when accepting the mission during briefing or after you completed it, which was a missed opportunity in my opinion, as you could have used some of the gameplay to tell the story similar to how factions speak to you in the surface, and although the campaigns did do this, they didn't use it as much as they should have. But these were not the only campaign missions, as there were more, although minor ones, which, although they didn't have a true narrative, did provide some more lore and world building. One of these pseudo-campaigns was from ICA, and they had you make some regular contracts for their story missions. One part made you get bright caps for a specific clientele who wanted to use them for food, another asked for you to do power facilities for, you guessed it, data, and the last one asked you to take down the Alpha Warden for a wealthy client who wanted it as a trophy. There was also another campaign set from Badam. This one was not part of any story, but a nice little challenge to do on the surface, as this mission had you go around Crescent Falls looking for foam prospectors that were stuck in place, and report them so that they could be picked up for later. These were all great missions, especially the campaigns, but besides these, the game had no other way to show off lore or any narrative. And even still, you had to go looking for these, as it wasn't really presented to the player. The missed opportunity, as I think the game's abandoned alien planet setting is one of the most unique and interesting features it has. The devs even confirmed that the campaigns really didn't do well and barely any players even interacted with them, which, although the game's narrative and setting were interesting, they weren't explored further, at least for now. So this concludes everything the cycle had to offer. Drop into a match and do PvEVP contracts to get points that place you into a leaderboard. Congratulations if you won first place, but even if you didn't win, evacuating the planet safely also provided rewards. You would have used these rewards to get better gear, modify it, and rinse and repeat. That was the basic gameplay loop. The game offered more, like a small narrative, 2 abandoned colorful sci-fi maps, multiple ways to play, and yet despite talking about the cycle for so long, we still have yet to answer one question. If it was so good, why can't I play it right now? Well, the answer is more complex. Jaeger has given us reasons, while at the same time being very quiet about the matter. From what we have heard, the game had multiple reasons why it failed. This failure led Jaeger to mold the game into a new version. One reason was, of course, the low player count. The game was unsuccessful in this regard, so this could be one of the reasons. But one counterpoint to this was that the game during this time was an Epic Games Store exclusive, which could have led to the problem. Another reason that Jaeger mentioned was that the game didn't keep player retention. Or in other words, players didn't have a true reason to keep returning to the game. Now, this one made some sense. Once you played enough games, you practically have seen all the game had to offer. Yeah, you could come back for some fun or to unlock something you didn't already have, but that was about it. The game didn't really force you to go to first place either, so you could put in the bare minimum and still be rewarded. And paired with long queue times and unbalanced matchmaking, it makes sense why many players didn't stick around for long. Another reason why the game might have failed, and this one is purely skeptical, is that the game is different from what Jaeger wanted to make in the first place. While researching for the game, I found this Project DNA article. This devlog describes a game that sounds a lot like the rework they were planning and showing off at the time. But somewhere along the time of development, perhaps to keep with the Battle Royale trend at the time, they decided to make a Battle Royale extraction-like MOBA-type game. And when that wasn't a success, and seeing the rise of extraction shooters like Escape from Tarkov and Hunt Showdown, perhaps Jaeger saw the opportunity to bring their original vision to life, at the cost of shutting down the current game at the time. I even got the chance to ask this question to the devs during a focus test group roundtable, and this was their response.
I checked this old document called Project DNA. I was wondering if the vision you guys came up with originally is what you were working on for the rework. What happened to end up in the current cycle?
Nice question. It's more similar to what we are making now. The original pitch was not about winning a match, more about personal quests. It had an in-game multiplayer online battle arena-like progression that we do not want to pursue now with the rework. It was simply that one thing led to another, and then to another. Just take a look at the old concept artworks. They definitely have the vibe of the rework.
So we did this pitch called Prospect, as Days described. It won the internal pitch jam. A pitch jam is a session where game ideas are presented, then evaluated, because we loved it. We made the prototype that did not have a winner of a match. It was fun and compelling. It was not 100% convincing, though. When we went into production, there was hardly any time to make a game because we just had around 7 months instead of the usual 2 to 3 years you could expect to produce a game. This is what happens when you just rush things, because you're excited for folks to play it instead of taking your time. We did a creative reset. We also lost the original creator of the pitch. We went through this stressful period where we had to make it in 6 months, and we got tunnel visioned. We screwed up, and we did move a lot away from the initial idea, but we got a small dedicated community that really loved that version. We thought, okay, people like this, though it wasn't the original version, what's next? We might have a chance with this. We tried to make it work, but looking at the numbers, it was deemed too hard to make this a big enough hit. A lot of players are excited about this kind of game. Emergent social drama and stories that are told during your time on the planet. In the end, the rework of the cycle is much more like the initial version of Prospect than the current version of the game.
Nevertheless, updates continued until the game shut down on October 13, 2021. Although the game ran for 3.5 seasons, it was still, according to the developers, in early access, until its eventual rework. The devs announced this in a blog post on September 4, 2020, and on the game's official website, stating the game's new direction, and even showcasing some early gameplay by streams. The Cycle Frontier proceeded to have a similar release style to its predecessor, with a time gap after the original game's final days to eventually some closed tests and finally a few open tests, where a lot of footage and hype started to generate around the game. Until it ultimately fully launched on June 8, 2022, and had its first official season on June 22nd in the same year. This was the start of the game many know today as the Cycle Frontier.
Decades ago, we settled on Fortuna 3. And for a while, this frontier world was paradise. We mined its vast resources in the shadow of ancient ruins. Then one day, the planet turned on us, with freak storms forcing us to evacuate the colony. With the surface lost, we set up base on Prospect Station, orbiting the deadly planet. It's where we trade, arm ourselves, gear up for the next drop. It's home. My name's Badam. I run things up here. So, you want to be a prospector? I've seen all types try their luck on the surface. Some are relentless, stopping at nothing and risking it all. Others are the more furtive sort, using stealth and caution to beat the odds. Many drop as a crew, sharing the loot, never leaving anyone behind. And of course, they're the hunters, preying on other prospectors and taking their haul. Skill might keep you alive, but you'll need more than that to thrive on Fortuna 3. In the end, anything goes in the hunt for fame and fortune. Welcome to the frontier.
With the Cycle gone came the Cycle Frontier, its successor. A complete rework the devs transformed the game into. And although they share the same name and setting, they were completely different games. For starters, its genre was now an extraction shooter, similar to Escape from Tarkov or Hunt Showdown, but working more as an introduction to the genre with similar gameplay, but being easier to understand and play. With the new direction came massive changes. Many things were removed or reworked to fit this new direction. One of the biggest changes was to the game's tone and art style. Where an area was once vibrant and colorful, has now been toned down while still maintaining some of its unique art direction, but with more of a focus on fog, lighting, and general detail. Locations got a significant facelift, with a lot more detail added, making the game feel more dense and alive. Places you could have traversed so easily now must be analyzed before going through specific routes. Gameplay was changed to fit this new genre, with looting being most of the gameplay. Tons of new items were added for players to loot, almost all of them having a detailed 3D model alongside them. However, not everything survived the genre transition. Prospector kits, regenerating health and shields, abilities, some weapons, bikes, most of its enemies, certain contracts, and most of the original game's identity was removed, but this was all needed change to fit the new genre they were going for. But despite all these changes, you can still see the DNA of the original. Most of its weapons, locations, contracts, and fundamental elements stayed. Despite major changes, it was still the Cycle. Still, either out of respect to the original version or as a form of fan service, there were references to what the game used to be, with props scattered among the map of old features or vanity items that would only make sense to veteran players. It's a bit sad that the game changed and removed a lot of what made it unique in the first place. And at first, when all of the stuff was being announced and showcased, many of the original players were upset over the drastic changes, some even abandoning the game entirely in protest. However, this new version of the game is the one most people got to know, and is probably the only version of the game they will ever know. And this is also the version that gained the most popularity and a bigger fan base. So, in a way, you can say that although the game did die, and with it, a lot of its identity, this was a necessary step in order to live again in a better light. But you might be wondering, what exactly was the Cycle Frontier? And what did it have to offer? This is the Cycle Frontier, an extraction shooter where you load up and drop into an alien planet to complete missions. Whether it be exploring the area, shooting up aliens, finding loot, completing a puzzle, or a combination of all. Once you got what you needed, extract, claim your rewards in the station, and use those rewards to get better gear, which you would use to go into more dangerous areas in Fortuna 3, where all the better loot is, to then extract with the better loot and rinse and repeat. There is just one catch. If you die, anything that you brought with you and have collected will be lost, and all that loot would belong to the planet, or somebody else. And the game was unforgiving at times. The hostile creatures were aggressive, attacked in groups, or had lots of health. You could have died from environmental damage, and because this is a multiplayer game, other players as well. But when you managed to evacuate after a tense situation, it felt rewarding. The game was hardcore with a lot going for it, and yet it was a fun experience as an introduction to the extraction shooter genre. Bundled with the unique sci-fi setting, its visuals, and it being free to play, it stood out as a unique game you couldn't find anywhere else. To fit its new identity, the game had added or revamped many features. One of these new features was the new enemy mobs with unique behavior, much more complex than anything the original game had. Striders were the new melee enemy. They were small, but were never alone, either with a pack or with other mobs, usually attacking as a group. But they could also be found sleeping, with at least one keeping an eye out or patrolling. Rattlers were the new ranged enemy. These alien bugs would lunge or spit at you with their acid, if they weren't sleeping themselves, usually being found around other creatures, mostly striders. Marauders were the mid-tier mob. These would clean themselves when they weren't being a menace to the player, either attacking with their sharp claws up close, or with their acid spit if you were far enough. The Crushers just minded their business until you went into their territory, when they would either charge or lob pieces of rocks at you. The new revamped Howler roamed the maps, dropping valuable pieces of its body as it went from location to location, and every now and then would scout the area using its echolocation, and if you followed it enough, could even find one of its nests where tons of Howler eggs guarded an area, and perhaps even get a chance to catch the Howler sleeping. All the creatures also seemed to react to the storm, seemingly being energized by it. Speaking about the storm was also reworked heavily, going from this menacing endgame scenario that forced players to leave the planet, to a more realistic storm that comes in every now and then, making the whole map dark. High winds made debris and foliage act like crazy, and the rain and thunder drown out almost all noise. The only lights are those of the storm's lightning seemingly out to get you, those of bioluminescent mobs or plants, or the flickering lights of abandoned structures. Still, the storm offered unique opportunities, as it could have worked as a blanket of cover to run from area to area, a quiet moment where you could rest for a bit while you waited it out, or venture into it to find exclusive storm-based rewards. The maps and the redesigns had to be one of the game's biggest improvements. There were places to explore, hide, fight, or loot in. During a match, when you were visiting new locations, the way each location was visually different, and how the planet was starting to reclaim these places, bundled with the environmental storytelling, was one of the game's highlights. And all while wondering if danger was around the corner, as environmental sounds played tricks on you, was the best way to build tension. And the game even added a new map with Theris Island, a third map, which, despite being a small island, had a huge underground network of tunnels that led to an ancient alien forge. This, bundled with how dark and disorienting it got, bundled with the lunatic drawings and skeletons all around the map, created this tense and uneasy atmosphere, as if you were treading in cursed land. Prospect Station even got an upgrade with its transition into the frontier. It still remained mostly the same gameplay-wise, but it did get a massive revamp to its appearance, making the station more detailed and lived in. Compared to the original space station, some new areas were added, like the Quick Shop, which served as a way to buy some simple gear at decent prices. And this once useless area in the original was now turned into the crafting station for the frontier, which helped with crafting better gear at the cost of materials from the surface. The Lucky Leaf Minbar even got an upgrade with the added Fortuna's Favorite section. This place was only available for in-game players and served as a way to get exclusive cosmetics. There was also a lot of new flair added to the station, with new NPCs and small details which made it feel much more alive and more like a true Prospect station. However, the biggest addition to the station was the introduction of the personal quarter system, which was a new way of progression, as upgrading your quarters was essential to prospecting in the frontier, as it helped with making your life easier, from improving the crafting times at the station, improving your stash and safe pocket inventories, and even providing generators that gave you in-game currency as well as free gear. Speaking of gear, I think we should discuss how loadouts work in the Cycle Frontier. In the original, loadouts were chosen before a match and were brought into one in the form of a gear store. And as long as you didn't change it, that would have been your loadout for as many games as you wanted. In the Frontier, things are different. You still get gear by leveling up factions and gaining their favor. However, instead of unlocking a piece of gear you can use indefinitely, like in the old game, you now unlock the ability to buy that piece of gear from their store. Because of the nature of the game, you never truly owned anything that was in your inventory, as death was just around the corner. Anything that you could as easily get, you could just as easily lose. This, however, did not stop gear from being important, as in my opinion added another layer to it. You could have used stronger, more expensive gear, which helped against tougher enemies and helped you stand in the fight longer, but run the risk of losing it by any means and losing money because of it. Or run the cheapest and weakest gear you could possibly run and just complete objectives, not risking much, but being at a disadvantage if you run into a problem you didn't anticipate. So without further delay, let's discuss the gear of the Frontier. All the gear in the Frontier could be bought, crafted in station, or found on the surface. Gear also had rarities ranging from common to legendary. Usually, the higher the rarity, the better it was. The gear in the Frontier was split into 4 categories: armor, backpacks, weapons, and consumables. Armor consisted of shields and helmets, the only protection between you and whatever you faced on the surface. It wasn't a second health bar, but acted more like how armor works in other games, giving you a small resistance against all forms of damage and reducing the damage you would normally take. Depending on the armor you used depended on how much you would be protected against and how much it would last, as shields and helmets had durability, and the more damage it protected you against, the more its durability dwindled, making you choose to either repair it for a cost or get a new armor set once its durability got low. And ignoring the durability meant that the armor could break on the surface, leaving you vulnerable if that happened. There was also special types of armor sets, with buffs attached to them, like the tactical armor sets, which gave you more stamina, or the restorative sets, which passively healed you over time. Backpacks were essential for any prospector, as they provided a way to stash any items you found on the surface, as long as you kept it within a weight limit. You see, every item in the Cycle Frontier had a weight attached to it, and backpacks could only carry a certain amount. So although basic backpacks were fairly easy to get as they provided just enough space for your ammo and consumables and a few things you found on the surface, if you wanted to fit more stuff, you would have to get a better backpack or constantly manage your inventory to see what you could and what you couldn't bring with you. Armor and backpacks also had an added feature in the endgame. In the endgame, you are tasked with exploring the Theris Island map, and if you ventured into its deepest, darkest corners, would have had the chance to find the ancient alien forge. If you waited for a storm, you would have found that the forge begun to activate, and if you put in high-tier armor or backpacks and certain materials, the forge would alter your gear in unique ways, giving you stronger gear with randomized buffs depending on the materials you used. Forged gear was the pinnacle of endgame, as the buffs gave you new incentives to get the best materials for a chance of getting the best gear possible. The weapons in the Frontier were mostly the same as they were in the original. However, there were exceptions. The FF4 detonator, the Carla, and the Haze were absent from this version of the game, and so were the Kepler Revitalizer and Recall Teleporter gadgets. But the weapons that did stay did get some changes. Design-wise, they stayed mostly the same, with most of their changes being tweaks to the designs, new sounds, and new animations to fit the more grounded version of the Frontier. The weapon upgrades were one of my favorite things to come out of the rework, and seeing and comparing how each weapon evolved just shows just how different each of the games were, and just how much changed between them. The Cycle Frontier even added new types of weapons. One of these new weapon types was Rusty Weapons. These were degraded versions of Cotec weapons you could only find on the surface of Fortuna 3, and although overall useless compared to the original counterparts, they did serve as some great world building and concept, and as a truly last resort weapon. But these weren't the only new types of weapons, as the Cycle Frontier also added prototype and Mark II variants for certain weapons. Prototype weapons were the same weapon physically and mostly in gameplay, but they were weaker compared to their later game variants. But it did help with smoothing out some progression and served as a way to play with a weapon before you would normally unlock it. Mark II weapons were only found on the surface, and these were a refined version compared to their original design. They functioned in the opposite way prototype weapons did. They still looked and behaved like the original weapon, but had higher stats. Weapons, just like in the old game, could also be modded. Although not as impressive as some of the mods in the original Cycle, the mods in the Cycle Frontier serve more as complements to the weapon rather than complete game changers. Mods could also be found on the surface or be bought or crafted in the station. You could find and attach mods for almost every aspect of the gun. Most mods were small buffs like how stock or foregrip mods helped with recoil or unholstering the weapon. But some mods like the flashlight served as a way to light up certain areas while having your weapon out. Suppressors help with dampening the gun's audio, and certain converters like the penetration mods help with piercing through armor of both players and mobs, whereas the creature damage converters help with dealing more damage to creature weak spots. While the old game had abilities that ranged from turrets to protective shells, the Cycle Frontier had consumables that didn't look as flashy as what its predecessor had, but were just as important. There were only two types of consumables in the Cycle Frontier: grenades and stims. Stims were essential for any drop in the surface, as you would have taken damage one way or another, either from mobs, environmental damage, or players. Stims served as a way to heal your health, but it wasn't instant, as using a stim made you temporarily vulnerable as you injected yourself with whatever stim you used and waited the animation out to properly heal. Stims were usually quicker to use but only recovered a fraction of your health. But if you wanted to heal as much health as possible, then you would use a medkit. Medkits were a different kind of stim. They looked and acted mostly the same, but medkits fully healed you back up to 100%, but took a considerably long time to use compared to a stim. And stims, like the rest of the gear, also came in tiers. So higher tier stims and medkits provided more health and sometimes faster use. Grenades were self-explanatory. There were different grenade types, like the smoke grenade, which helped with providing some smoke cover to hide behind, the audio grenade, which created an audio distraction that worked on mobs and players, the Howler grenade, which was only available after doing the Howler questline, which was a way to temporarily blind and disorient enemies. And last but not least, there was standard grenades, which exploded a short while after being thrown. This was all the gear available to players. Before you dropped into Fortuna 3, you had to choose your loadout from the gear you already had in your stash. All players could bring 2 weapons, a shield and a helmet for armor, and a backpack with whatever consumables and ammo you wanted. Once you had your gear, you would go to the drop terminal and from there choose if you wanted to insure your gear or not. Insurance was there in case you died on the surface and served as a way to either get a percentage of the gear's cost or to retrieve the gear back to your stash, depending on the insurance you were getting. So gear up, Prospector, because we're dropping into Fortuna 3, and things as usual won't go as planned. Compared to the original, the combat in Frontier was tense and quick, to the point where every decision counted. Believe it or not, audio played a massive role in combat. Every action you did made a noise. Running around with a bag full of gear, shooting a gun, or doing certain activities or motions made a noise. So the audio worked in both ways, alerting you of what was nearby, whether it was an enemy mob in the area, a player shooting their weapon, or the sounds of an alarm letting you know someone you can't see is nearby. This also meant that others nearby could also hear the same, meaning you had to listen carefully to what was going on around you, as well as be mindful of the noise you made. PvE compared to the original was now an actual threat rather than an afterthought, as almost everything could kill you if you weren't careful, from fall damage to lightning and toxic gases, and that's not even counting the enemy mobs. We already talked about them earlier, but mobs were dangerous in groups and alone due to their new AI. They not only worked on sight, but could also hear if you were near, so you had to learn how they behaved and attacked if you didn't want to die.
and although they were bullet spongy, each had a weak point that you could exploit for massive damage. PvP was always an adrenaline rush, no matter how intense or long an encounter was, due to how easily you can die and how much you could lose. But meeting a player didn't always mean combat, as every player could use proximity chat or a comm wheel to interact with other players.
Yeah, we do it. Are you good with that? Are you good with that? Okay.
Got it.
As well as use certain types of equipment like smoke grenades or audio decoys to hide behind or cause a distraction. The movement was heavily toned down to be more grounded. The player now takes fall damage from certain heights and has a stamina bar that limits their movement. Gone are all the movement kits and abilities. Now players can only sprint, slide, jump, and mantle, but at the cost of using their stamina. And being on an empty stamina bar meant being vulnerable for a few moments. With the new combat and movement systems, it made everything more hardcore, which in turn made the player think about their choices and play more carefully. Whether they be mindful of the noise they make, deciding whether or not to take a fight, or taking certain routes to avoid certain encounters, everything had to be considered because any choice could be your last. Contracts were either removed or reworked completely, with some new ones being added. Due to the game now being an extraction shooter with high stakes and the amount of lootable items, the game relied heavily on RNG for loot to feel rewarding. So because of this, many of the contracts were reworked to have the system in mind, or simply removed, because drones, lithium gas, mag train, zeal, cycle spike, and all of the personal contracts were just absent in this version of the game. PvP was more different due to the nature of the game. You would get jobs to hunt players with the context of either clearing out an area or to test out a product, but fights could go either way. You could succeed and get their loot as well as complete a mission, or lose it all and be forced to start from scratch. Minerals went from drilling a mineral vein and defending it from waves of mobs to fully looking out for specific mineral veins that would spawn randomly in the map, physically mining the nodes with a mining tool of your choice to get the minerals you wanted, and depending on the mineral node and RNG, have a chance of either getting common minerals or a rare variant. The hunt contract changed from hunting mutated dirt beasts to simply just hunting either of the new creatures and looting what they dropped, hoping you got what you needed. Sometimes the contract would spice up by either hunting the elite variant of a creature or by hunting them in the storm or with other specific conditions. Other than that, you simply just hunted creatures with the challenge being the RNG, dropping what you needed, and surviving the encounter. Uplinks changed from standing in an area and claiming it for some passive points, hoping no one would steal it from you, to bringing a data drive with you and going to an uplink station to download data into the drive until you got the rarity that you needed. And as the uplink slowly downloaded data, it made lots of noise alerting mobs and players of your presence. Or you could just get lucky and find the data drive you needed somewhere and turn that in instead. Power stations went from finding 3 terminals and powering up a generator to finding 3 batteries by solving a puzzle. Each time you placed or removed a battery, changed the amount of locked doors around you. Once you found and got all the 3 batteries, you would then place them in a determined area, which would then open a loot room with valuables. The laser drill went from a team-based exclusive activity into a late-game activity that announced your presence to the entire map, but provided some of the most valuable rewards in the game. They even added a new type of contract in the form of dead drops. These were hidden containers that were in most POIs. You had to find these dead drops that were usually pretty well hidden and stash something in them for missions. However, most of the contracts in the Cycle Frontier relied on exploration and looting. So sometimes you would be tasked on exploring an area, looting certain containers, or looking for a specific item. It sounds simple, and some of them were, but when you take into account just how quickly things can change in the surface, even the most basic contracts were risky. These aren't all the reworked or new contracts, but the most notable ones in my opinion. And although some did get removed for the Cycle Frontier, the game also introduced new contracts in the form of jobs and campaigns. The campaigns and jobs were different for each faction. Completing them rewarded XP for the faction you worked for, which helped you level them up and unlock new missions, gear, and activities for each. But jobs were simpler to do and had no further context besides what they offered. They worked like the contracts in the old game, and the ones I mentioned previously were just some of the jobs you could do, as well as being most of the gameplay in the surface. Campaigns, however, were different, working to introduce player mechanics, locations, and dangers of Fortuna 3, all while providing some narrative depth to them. Working more like the story campaigns from the old game, but with more context and incentive to do them. Granted, the narrative and stories were different from the original, but in my opinion, needed change as these campaigns were much better than anything the old game offered. Each faction started off teaching you the basics of what they specialize in, while giving you simple contracts as it slowly transitions into more difficult contracts that unlock more in-game activities and gear. For example, ICA had this campaign where it started with you looking for an old friend of the ICA's faction leader, and as you slowly do missions for her and follow the path of this missing Prospector, you eventually get to meet this site. They then used this event to develop the faction further, which in ICA's case was this dead body leaving behind evidence and data for a new power source using meteors that, as the campaign goes on, becomes the staple for unlocking and finding a new fuel source and unlocking the oil pump endgame activity. I love stuff like this, and almost all the campaigns have something similar to this level of storytelling through missions mixed in with regular contracts. Korolev is doing their shady stuff on the surface, and perhaps you are aiding them in hiding evidence or doing some sort of crime. But it doesn't matter because I now have the best weapons in the game and can now call in a laser drill. Or how Osiris is your typical research faction doing stuff like picking up flowers or analyzing the fauna, until your task on finding and waking up a sleeping scientist to blow up a hole in the middle of a forest to fight this game's biggest threat, the Alpha Crusher. The campaigns were great. I liked the narrative of each and how it was presented, despite them being contracts with extra content and rewards. If I have any criticism, it would be that most of their context was given to you during mission briefing text that you had to read before and after the campaigns. And besides that, players could also rely on environmental storytelling or item descriptions to explain certain things. I sort of wish they kept the system from the old game where factions would speak to you on the surface as you did your contracts. Another complaint was how when the campaigns were starting to pick up, they would immediately slow down to have you do filler quests to simply extend playtime, in my opinion. So the Cycle Frontier is shaping up to be a great game that expands on the foundation of its successor. It's a great game with some flaws, but a loyal player base. This game has the potential of being one of the best free games ever. Surely nothing bad can ever happen to it. Right? So far, I have talked about the game for a while, hyping it up and telling you how good it is. However, despite all the Cycle Frontier had going for it, it had some flaws. First off was some simple to explain stuff. Being sincere, I thought a lot of the game systems needed more time in the oven. Matchmaking was terrible for some time, there was a lot of balance issues, some of the devs' decisions were kind of weird if I'm being honest. Cheaters. A lot of cheaters. There wasn't really a proper endgame. There was a lot of overpriced cosmetics, and that's just stuff I remember from the top of my head. However, its biggest problem, and the one that would lead to its eventual downfall, was technical debt. For those who don't know, technical debt is when old code starts affecting the product's infrastructure and future code, causing many bugs and errors. The Cycle Frontier, an extraction shooter with a lot more detail and mechanics, was built on the foundation from The Cycle, an extraction-based PvEVP battle royale, and because of this, acquired a ton of technical debt. Jaeger did try to fix a lot of the issues. For the massive cheater problem, they added a way to get your gear back if you died to one, as well as many anti-cheat improvements. They did try fixing matchmaking, and they tried making balance decisions with the appeal to a more casual audience. However, most of these fixes came a little too late, as the player base slowly dwindled, and the more they did, the more technical debt they acquired. It was announced on June 28, 2023 that the Cycle Frontier would sunset or shut down on September 27, 2023, sharing the same fate as its predecessor. Due to various reasons, the main ones according to Jaeger were the cheater problem, which they never really recovered from, the technical debt, and just like its predecessor,
the game couldn't keep player retention as well as not being financially viable. And so the game was given 3 months before it would eventually shut down. All the time I spent playing the Cycle and the Cycle Frontier was amazing. And despite all the problems both games had, they were still very great games to have played. If only for a while. And to see a game you liked and devote so much time not only to die once, but twice, well, it's a hard pill to swallow. So we made it to the end. Both of these games no longer exist by the time you're watching this video, with traces of each being found through YouTube videos, web archives, or people's memories. The love from both the developers and the community is present almost everywhere. The community, which for both games was one of the most loyal and most creative communities I've ever been a part of. The amount of fan art, suggestions, memes, clips, and videos about almost everything about the game is monumental. They were there through almost every stage, and even when both games' sunset was on the horizon, some stayed till the very end, doing everything they could to support them until the shutdown. A community so devoted that it even gained some their fame. People like Marcus DK Mystic, Basco P7, Last Say and Prince, and more creators who streamed or made videos for their respective game. A community so dedicated that even after the game's death, they are still as creative as ever. Some fans have taken it upon themselves with recreating the game in other games like Fortnite or even Minecraft, whereas others have claimed to make their own The Cycle-inspired game. No matter the game, you can see the passion and love from the team at Jaeger, putting their all into the game, and despite the community not seeing eye to eye with them, each iteration of The Cycle was a work of art, and the devs at Jaeger do need to be appreciated for what they've done. Speaking of Jaeger, they are busy making their own projects, which as of editing this video have still not been announced. But we do know they are busy co-developing with other studios, like working with Funcom, helping them with the Dune Awakening, a survival MMO taking place in the Dune universe, and Shark Mob AB with Exoborn, a sci-fi extraction shooter with a very dangerous storm, and Exosuits, which also wait a minute. Despite the jokes, Jaeger has said multiple times they aren't going to go back to the Cycle universe. They have made references to it, even made a Fortnite mode out of it, but the Cycle universe and IP is gone, and it probably won't come back no matter how many times people ask. There are other games out there similar to each. Games like Ascendant Infinity and Off the Grid remind me a bit of the original Cycle, each in their own unique way. Ascendant is more of a squad-based competitive quester that has a lot of similarities to the original Cycle both in appearance and gameplay-wise, but I won't deny that it's more of a goal extraction-based shooter than the Cycle. Off the Grid is more of a traditional battle royale taking place in a cyberpunk world with augmentations. It's third person, and although it doesn't really have much similarities to the Cycle, its augments and how they each played a role during combat did remind me a bit of the abilities and suits of the old game. There is also a light extraction based element to it with a certain type of item, but it's still mostly a traditional battle royale and still plays like one. But if you played the Cycle Frontier and want something to fill that void, you would have to work with games like Escape from Tarkov, Hunt Showdown, or more recent or upcoming ones like Delta Force, Arc Raiders, or Marathon. Escape from Tarkov is what inspired Jaeger to change the game in the first place, and despite being more mechanically in-depth, it's the definitive extraction shooter experience. Hunt Showdown is more of an extraction-based quester. It does have PvEVP elements, but the main objective is killing a big boss at the center of the map while looking out for players at the same time. All in a Western horror setting. If you like how the audio, quick tense situations, and gunfights played a role in the Cycle Frontier, this is the best game for you. Delta Force is effectively 3 games in one, depending on which mode you decide to play. It's like Call of Duty, Battlefield, and the Cycle Frontier all rolled into one. I'll focus more on the extraction-based game mode, which is just a simplified extraction shooter, just like the Cycle Frontier was. And although the setting is more akin to a futuristic Tarkov, this is the closest you can get to the Cycle Frontier in terms of gameplay. And if you don't believe me, just look at what one of the old community managers of the Cycle Frontier has to say. You can also wait for games like Marathon or Arc Raiders, who both are PvEVP shooters who might be worthy competitors, but little is known from them, despite the trailers and few dev articles. Only time will tell how much they can be like the Cycle Frontier. But honestly, no game can really be like the Cycle was in any moment of its lifetime. Its unique setting and gameplay for both versions made it stand out among the rest of its genres. And I really doubt we will get something truly like that ever again. So from an underrated free-to-play, player versus environment versus player, first-person competitive quest shooter Royale beginning, to a cult classic free sci-fi extraction shooter, this is the game with two identities and two lives. This is The Cycle.